Hey everybody, so I just read the book Red Notice, written by Bill Browder, and I'll give you a little summary of it. And basically, if you're interested in knowing what life is like for Russians in Russia, what it's really like, especially with law and order or the lack of law and order, this is a book for you. You must read it. In fact, Bill Browder said at the end, please share this with anyone and everyone. This is the way to fight back at the corruption there. But the reason he named it Red Notice, first of all, I'll tell you what Red Notice is. There's an international police agency known as Interpol, and they are connected to all countries around the world, all the police stations, and all kinds of law enforcement. So if someone's wanted in one country, the country that they're wanted in could issue a notice through Interpol called a Red Notice. Then that'll go out to the entire worldwide law enforcement network, and then if that person tries to cross a border somewhere, or his ID or passport is scanned, that'll come up, the arrest warrant will come up, and then he could be arrested and deported. The scary part is when Russia does it. Now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, to transition from communism to capitalism, the Russian government sold off most state assets to the people. One way was through the Voucher privatization. The government granted one privatization certificate to every Russian citizen, and that was 150 million people. And they were valued at $20 each, so that would be a total of $3 billion in vouchers. Now the Russian people received these vouchers for free and could sell or trade them, and dealers emerged and then began to consolidate them into fewer and fewer hands. The shares, what happened with these vouchers at a voucher auction, the shares of the companies that were being sold were divided evenly amongst the vouchers that were present. So if there were 500 people there with 500 vouchers, the company would get divided evenly amongst the 500 vouchers. But if only 2 people showed up, and let's say one guy had 5 vouchers and the other guy had 10 vouchers, the company would be divided evenly amongst their 15 vouchers. And so that bred corruption, because there were companies like one oil company allegedly closed the airport near their company so no one could fly in to participate in the auction, and then another one put burning tires on the roads that led up to the voucher auction so no one could participate. Like Bill Browder said, instead of 150 million Russians partaking in the privatization, 22 oligarchs bought 39% of the Russian economy while everyone else lived in poverty. Now, one big example would be Gazprom. Bill Browder is told by someone that Gazprom, which happened to be the largest and most corrupt company, he was told that the management at Gazprom were just a bunch of crooks. One example was they stole a 400 billion cubic meter oil and gas field. It was named Tarko Salene Tigaz, and it was worth about $9 billion. Again, it was 400 billion cubic meters of gas. Between 1996 and 1999, Gazprom management had sold 7 huge gas fields for almost nothing. A subsidiary of Gazprom named Sibneftgaz was worth a minimum of $530 million at the most conservative estimate, but a group of crooks paid $1.3 million to pay for 53%, and that was a 99.5% discount. One of the people in the group was Gennady Vyacherev. He happened to be the brother of Gazprom's CEO, Rem Vyacherev. Gennady and his son Andrei bought 5% of the company for $87,600, even though the minimum value of 5% was valued at $26.5 million. Another one bought 18% for $158,000 by a company owned by Victor Browder, and he happened to be a manager at Gazprom's Strategic Development Department. And then another 10% was bought by a company owned by Vyacheslav Kuznetsov, the head of Gazprom's internal audit department. Again, the internal audit department is the policeman of the company to make sure nothing is being done that shouldn't be done, and yet the head of the department got in on the scam to steal the company. Gazprom gave away the equivalent of Kuwait's entire reserves. There were 500 Russian articles and 275 English written articles on Bill Browder's research on this, and the government's audit chamber investigated and found no wrongdoing. Gazprom's board had PricewaterhouseCoopers conduct a review as well, and they too found no wrong. Well, PricewaterhouseCoopers happened to be the full-time auditor for Gazprom, making millions of dollars a year, plus they shouldn't be the one to check things out because they're the auditor, so they're protecting themselves, because if they found something wrong with Gazprom, then they did something wrong themselves. So the bottom line is Vladimir Putin he fired the CEO, Rem Vyacheslav, and replaced him with Alexei Miller, who pledged to secure the assets and get back the stolen ones. Now, Bill Browder then started investigating the theft at other companies, and then gave his findings to the media again, and then again Vladimir Putin would then act. So for a while, Vladimir Putin and Bill Browder were on the same page. In fact, Putin kind of liked Browder because Browder was doing the real research for Putin, and Putin could use this to get his work done. And the thing is, when Vladimir Putin got elected in January of 2000, the power of the presidency was in the hands of the oligarchs and the Russian mafia, but Putin wanted to take back that power and bring it back to him at the Kremlin. So that's why he had to get back at the oligarchs, and he was using Browder's research to do that. But then there was kind of a turning point. In October 2003, Vladimir Putin arrested the richest man in Russia named Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and not only did he arrest him, he took his 36% share of the Yukos oil company, of which he was CEO of. Then he tried and convicted him and put him in a Siberian prison for 9 years. Then the other oligarchs, that kind of shook them in their shoes, because they were like, well, if he's going to do this to the richest oligarch, then he could do it to any of us. So one by one, all the oligarchs went to Putin and had little meetings with him and asked, what can we do to stay on your good side? And then, like Bill Browder said, he doesn't know the exact figures, but Putin basically said to him, I'll take 50% of what you got, and then you can keep doing what you're doing. You can keep living your good life. So then Putin kind of started to turn on Browder because he didn't really need him anymore. So then Browder basically became Putin's number one enemy, because since Putin became one of the oligarchs, he didn't want Browder to continue investigating. And so on November 13th, 2005, Browder was stopped at the Moscow airport, detained for 15 hours, and expelled, and he hasn't returned since. He was deemed to be a threat to national security, which is kind of a joke. Now, then, in June 4th, 2007, Putin raided the offices of Browder's company, Hermitage. The lead officer was Artem Kuznetsov. That was the lead officer in the raid, and the lead investigator was a guy named Pavel Karpov. Now remember the names Kuznetsov and Karpov, because they were two of the worst in the whole scheme of things. And then a tax fraud case was opened up against Browder, and a $71 million judgment was placed against Hermitage. Now, Kuznetsov and Karpov, when they raided Browder's offices, the thing is, before that raid, Browder had already successfully sold off all the stocks and assets and gotten the money safely out of the country. So all he had were offices and then paperwork. But Karpov and Kuznetsov had a plan. They stole the original company seals, certificates of ownership, and registration files to steal the company, to steal Bill Browder's companies that made up his hedge fund, Hermitage. Now the Russian State Investigative Committee, known as SIC, that's their version of the FBI, they said Kuznetsov and Karpov did nothing wrong. And then when Browder and his lawyers filed complaints with different agencies like the Internal Affairs Department of the Interior Ministry, the Internal Affairs Department gave the complaint to Karpov to investigate, and he was the one being investigated, so he was investigating himself. Now what these criminals did is they opened up bank accounts for the companies that they stole from Browder. Again, they didn't have any assets of Browder's, just the actual companies. But the reason they needed to steal these companies and put them in their name is because then the last year Browder was in business, he paid $230 million in taxes. So these criminals used the companies to get a fraudulent tax return in the same amount. They got $230 million in tax returns for the companies that they stole for Browder, and therefore, in essence, they stole $230 million from the Russian taxpayers and put it in their pocket. Well, this was all found out because Browder had hired a tax attorney named Sergei Magnitsky, and he uncovered all the scams. And then they filed complaints with every government agency and gave this information to all the newspapers and press, but the only response from the government was to raid the offices of Browder's lawyers. Now, 2 of his 3 lawyers, after these raids, they decided to leave the country because it was too dangerous to stay. But the 3rd one, Sergei Magnitsky, the tax attorney, didn't want to leave. He stayed. He was a real patriot to Russia. He loved his country, and he was so upset about the theft of the hundreds of millions of dollars from the Russian taxpayer, and he, even though Browder insisted he leave, he wouldn't leave. He said, the law would protect me, I'll be fine. Well, unfortunately, on November 24th, 2008, Sergei Magnitsky's house was raided and he was arrested. And he was treated horribly. They put him in prisons, horrible prison environments, and then kept transferring him around to the worst and worst prisons. They were making it so miserable for him because they wanted him to confess to tax frauds that that weren't true, that was fraudulent. Now, Sergei Magnitsky became real sick in April of 2009, and he was diagnosed with pancreatitis, gallstones, and cholecystitis. He needed medical attention right away, but they would not give it to him. At one point, he was taken to an infirmary, but the nurse just sat there and told him, you should have gotten treatment before you went to prison. But he was like, this happened in prison. And she just ignored him and let him suffer and scream in pain. I mean, it was just immense pain. And he suffered, and this was complete torture, and he suffered in the pain from these medical conditions for 7 months. And then on November 16th, 2009, he went into critical condition. He was taken to the medical center at Matrosskaya Tishina, but instead of getting medical care, he was taken to an isolation cell where 8 guards in riot gear with batons went in and they beat him to death. They murdered him, they left his body there on the floor. When they left, then a doctor came in. Well, yes, that's a little late for the doctor to come in. The press officer at the Interior Ministry lied and said Magnitsky died of heart failure and showed no signs of violence. Well, that wasn't true. Now, a senator from Maryland named Ben Cardin, well, after all this, Bill Browder wanted to do something in Magnitsky's name. He wanted to get some sort of justice. So he was in touch with Senator Ben Cardin. Ben Cardin sent a letter to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton about this whole situation. They wanted to do something called the Magnitsky Act, because there is some obscure rule in all the laws that talked about sanctioning criminals like these guys. So in the letter they gave Clinton the names of 60 officials that were involved in some way in Magnitsky's persecution and murder. Now on June 26th, well actually I'll just say on July 18th, the Magnitsky Act was signed into law. And basically this was going to bar those 60-some individuals from Russia from coming into the United States, and any assets they had in the United States would be frozen. Vladimir Putin issued an executive order and said one of his top priorities in this order was to stop the Magnitsky Act. So in retaliation, and some of you may remember that Putin signed into a law banning Americans from being able to adopt Russian children. That was the retaliation to the Magnitsky Act. And that was going to put many kids in harm, because these kids were in orphanages with health problems, and those were the ones that always were given to the Americans. So Putin was willing to risk the lives of children. Now, after all this, Putin put Bill Browder on trial in absentia, and he also put Sergei Magnitsky, the guy that he was involved in killing, put him on trial posthumously for these charges. Now, on April 22nd, an arrest warrant for Bill Browder, Putin and they tried to go to Interpol and get a red notice arrest warrant put up for Browder so he would be arrested wherever he was and then deported to Russia. Well, with some intervention, Interpol turned down Russia's request. And then Russia tried it again sometime later, and Interpol turned it down again. On April 2nd, 2014, the European Parliament voted 750-0 to impose sanctions on 32 Russians complicit in the Magnitsky case. Then, in December 2016, Congress passed a global version of the Magnitsky Acts. And one of the examples that came out of that was that sanctions were placed on the 17 Saudi Arabian officials involved in the targeting and killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Other countries have started enacting their own Magnitsky Acts. Some of those include Estonia, the United Kingdom, Canada, Lithuania, and Latvia. And then finally I wanted to give another example of the corruption. A couple by the name of Olga and Vladen Stepnova. Now, if I recall correctly in the book, Olga Stepnova is the one that she was working at the tax government agency that actually signed that $230 million tax fraudulent refund. And she, of course, then got a pocket part of that $230 million. She and her husband have a yearly salary of $38,000, but they were worth over $40 million in assets and property. Olga's 85-year-old mom got a pension of $3,500 a year, and yet she owned $12 million in land. So that's just, the corruption over there is just super crazy, and the scary part is nothing's changed because you all know who's still president over there. And so Bill Browder just wants to get this information out to the whole planet. So I highly recommend this book, Red Notice. You would be shocked and amazed what you read in there, and it's definitely worthwhile. So please read it, and I'll put a link to Amazon where you can just go and buy it if you want. So thanks, and have a good day.